What if I told you that a drone descended to the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle last summer, and what it filmed in the final 11 minutes of its descent has been classified, suppressed, and quietly leaked to a handful of researchers who refuse to be named publicly? Not a few hours of routine seafloor video, not a flat sediment plain, something else entirely. For 80 years, the Bermuda Triangle has swallowed ships, aircraft, and human beings without leaving a trace. 5 Navy bombers vanished mid-flight on a routine training run. 542-foot supply ship disappeared with 306 men aboard. Commercial airliners blinked off radar in cloudless skies. And for 8 decades, no one could get close enough to the bottom to find out what had happened to them. The pressure was too extreme. The trenches were too deep. The technology didn't exist. Until last year, July 2024, an autonomous deep-sea drone reached the floor of the Brownson Deep, the lowest point of the entire Atlantic Ocean, and its cameras captured 3 things at the same time. The first was a graveyard of ships so vast that the team aboard the surface vessel lost the ability to count them in real time. The second was a series of geometric formations on the seafloor that, in the lead researcher's own words, are inconsistent with any known geological process at that depth. The third was something moving along the edge of those formations for less than 4 seconds before the drone's signal severed instantly and the vehicle was lost forever. What that footage shows, and what the scientists who've reviewed it are now saying behind closed doors, doesn't just explain 80 years of missing ships, rewrites the entire history of the Atlantic floor. The story begins on December 5th, 1945. 5 U.S. Navy Avengers torpedo bombers, designated Flight 19, took off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale at 2:10 p.m. on a routine 2-hour training mission. The weather was clear. The crews were experienced. Aircraft had been inspected that morning and were in perfect working order. Into the flight, the lead pilot, Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, radioed the tower with a message that would echo through aviation history. Both of his assistants had stopped working. He couldn't determine which direction was west. Ocean below him, he said, looked strange. Wrong. The sky and the sea had merged into a single white haze. The radio chatter that followed over the next 2 hours was fragmented and increasingly panicked. Pilots reported that everything looked white, that the water beneath them appeared to be moving in the wrong direction, that their instruments were spinning. The last clear transmission came at 7:04 p.m. Then nothing. The U.S. Navy launched the largest search and rescue operation in maritime history. A PBM Martin Mariner flying boat dispatched within the hour to find them, carrying 13 men, also vanished within 20 minutes of takeoff. 5 planes, 14 pilots, 1 rescue aircraft, 27 men, not a single body, not a single piece of wreckage. Ever. Official Navy report listed the cause as reasons unknown. Those 2 words, buried in a 500-page document, would launch the most enduring maritime mystery of the modern era. But Flight 19 was only the most famous case. The U.S. Coast Guard records list more than 75 vessels and 20 aircraft that have vanished inside the triangle since the start of the 20th century. The vast majority were never found. Not a hull, not a fuselage, not a single dog tag washed ashore on a beach in Bermuda or Florida or Puerto Rico. The sea, it seemed, was hiding them all. In 1964, a writer named Vincent Gaddis published an article in Argosy magazine titled "The Deadly Bermuda Triangle." He'd done what no one had bothered to do before, plotted the disappearances on a map. A pattern emerged, a near-perfect triangle stretching from Miami to Bermuda to Puerto Rico, covering roughly 500,000 square miles of open Atlantic. Inside that triangle, ships and planes had been vanishing at a rate that defied statistical probability. Gaddis gave the region a name, the Bermuda Triangle, the name stuck. 10 years later, a linguist and treasure hunter named Charles Berlitz, grandson of the founder of the Berlitz language schools, published a book by the same title, sold over 14 million copies in 30 languages. Berlitz wasn't a scientist. He was a polyglot from a wealthy publishing family with a lifelong fascination for the unexplained. Academic world dismissed him immediately. They called him a sensationalist, called him a fraud. But Berlitz didn't care what they called him. He'd interviewed survivors. He'd read the redacted Navy files, spoken to commercial pilots who refused to fly the route at night. He believed something was happening down there, something the government knew about and refused to discuss. He pointed to two details in particular that the skeptics couldn't explain away. The first was the compass failures. Nearly every documented incident, witnesses had reported their navigation instruments failing in identical ways. Compasses spinning, radar going blank, radios filled with static that sounded in the words of one surviving pilot, like voices underwater. The second was the missing wreckage. Modern shipping disasters produce debris, oil slicks, life rafts, fragments that float for weeks. Yet, inside the triangle, the ocean seemed to swallow everything whole. Berlitz argued that something was generating those magnetic disturbances from below the seafloor of itself, and that something was preserving what it took. Spent the rest of his life arguing that science would one day have to confront what was lying at the bottom of the Atlantic. He died in 2003, dismissed by the establishment. He never lived to see what the drone would find, but almost 50 years after his book first appeared, a team armed with technology Berlitz could only have dreamed of would finally go look. So maybe you're still skeptical. Maybe the Bermuda Triangle is just a stretch of busy shipping lanes where statistically inevitable accidents got mythologized into a conspiracy. That's the position most oceanographers have held for decades. But what if I told you the water geography of this region is unlike anything else on Earth, and that for 500 years sailors have called it the most treacherous water in the Western Hemisphere? Most people picture the Atlantic floor as a flat, muddy expanse stretching uniformly between continents. It isn't. Beneath the Bermuda Triangle lies one of the most violent and contradictory pieces of terrain on the planet. At its northeastern edge sits the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean, plunging to a confirmed depth of 28,232 feet at a location called the Brownson Deep. That's more than 5 miles straight down. Pressure at that depth exceeds 12,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a steel sphere flat in milliseconds. But the trench itself is only part of the story. The real killer is what surrounds it. The Blake Plateau to the west and the rim of the Puerto Rico Trench to the south are riddled with submerged limestone reefs, some rising in jagged spires hundreds of feet from the seafloor, others lurking just below the surface. Spanish sailors in the 16th century called this region El Cementerio del Atlántico, the cemetery of the Atlantic. Before the invention of accurate longitude in the late 1700s, before sonar soon, before GPS, ships entering this region were sailing blind through a field of razor-sharp limestone teeth. The Gulf Stream, which roars through the triangle at speeds up to 5 knots, would drag a damaged vessel out of sight of land within hours. By morning, there would be nothing left on the surface to mark the spot. NOAA mapping data from 2019 revealed a series of vertical chimneys descending from the seafloor into total darkness, some over 300 feet wide. Researchers lost their sonar return on one shaft at 4,800 feet. Not because the equipment failed, because the shaft kept going. There are massive deposits of methane hydrate on the seafloor, capable of releasing gas bubbles powerful enough to sink a passing ship. The science is real. The geology is real. The only question that remained for decades was whether anyone had actually seen what was waiting at the bottom. 2024, someone did. In June of 2024, a private oceanographic research foundation funded by a consortium of European investors quietly launched an expedition to the Puerto Rico Trench. The mission was led by a Belgian marine geophysicist named Dr. Henrik Vail, a man who'd spent 2 decades studying deep-sea subduction zones and who, in 2021, had published a controversial paper suggesting that the deepest sections of the Bermuda Triangle had never been systematically surveyed because mainstream oceanography had assumed there was not even down there worth finding. The paper was largely ignored. But Vail had backing this time. He had the Helios IV, an autonomous deep-sea vehicle developed by a Norwegian engineering firm and rated to a crush depth of 36,000 feet. It was equipped with twin 8K cameras, multispectral imaging arrays, high-sensitivity magnetometers, side-scan sonar, and a phased array imaging system capable of mapping the seafloor at centimeter resolution. Total cost $14.7 million. The drone was lowered from the research vessel Andromeda, positioned directly above the northern slope of the Brownson Deep at coordinates 19 degrees 41 north, 67 degrees 15 west, at 06:42 local time on July 14, 2024. The descent began. For the first 18,000 feet, everything was textbook normal. The drone passed through the standard layers of the deep ocean, the mesopelagic, where the last traces of sunlight die, the bathypelagic, where temperatures drop near freezing, abyss-pelagic, where most known life ceases. The cameras fished exactly what the team expected: bioluminescent jellyfish drifting through the floodlights, a glimpse of an anglerfish hunting in the dark, the occasional curious Dumbo octopus. Vail's team monitored the descent from the surface vessel, transmitting data through a tethered fiber optic relay that carried both video and telemetry in real time. Then, at 19,400 feet, the magnetometer began to register something strange. This magnetic field, which should have remained steady and predictable at that depth, began to oscillate in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Vail's team initially blamed the equipment. They ran a full diagnostic sequence. Instruments checked out. The field itself was fluctuating. By 22,000 feet, the oscillations had grown to as much as 40% of baseline. By 25,000 feet, the drone's onboard compass was spinning. The side-scan sonar was returning hundreds of small, hard contacts on the slope below. Vail, watching from the control room aboard the Andromeda, did not order the drone back to the surface. He ordered the descent to continue. The deeper the drone fell, the stranger the readings became. The magnetometer wasn't just oscillating anymore. It was pinning to its maximum reading and then dropping back to zero in a regular pulse, as if something below the drone was generating an electromagnetic field powerful enough to overwhelm the Earth's natural magnetism. The side-scan sonar continued to return contacts, hundreds of them. Vail's chief sonar analyst, a woman named Dr. Liesl Brandt, watched the screens and tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The contacts were too regularly spaced to be natural geological debris. They were too small to be a single large structure. They were arranged across the slope in what looked, on the high-resolution sonar return, like a debris field. But debris from what? At 26,500 feet, the drone's primary floodlights came on. The forward camera caught its first clear glimpse of the seafloor below. The image that flashed onto the screens in the Andromeda's control room caused several members of the team to physically rise from their seats. The seafloor was not flat. It was not empty. It was densely littered with shapes, long shadows, angular silhouettes, rising from the sediment that did not match the expected geology of the trench. Vail himself, in the leaked control room audio, can be heard whispering a single word in Flemish that translates roughly as impossible. The drone continued its slow, controlled descent. The floodlights swept across the seafloor, and what those lights revealed, layer by layer, over the next 11 minutes, would force every researcher who has seen the footage to reconsider what they thought they knew about the Atlantic Ocean, about the history of human civilization, and about what might still be living in places we have never thought to look. For decades, mainstream oceanography held that the floor of the Puerto Rico Trench was a relatively featureless expanse of pelagic sediment broken occasionally by hydrothermal vents and cold methane seeps, boring, empty, geologically inert. The Helios IV proved that picture wasn't just incomplete, it was catastrophically wrong. As the floodlights swept across the seafloor below the drone, the first thing the cameras resolved was a field of shipwrecks. One, not a dozen, hundreds. The sonar count, refined over the following 3 weeks of analysis, would eventually settle at 312 distinct vessels visible in the surveyed area alone, with strong indications that the field extended for kilometers beyond the drone's mapping range. And they were not from a single era. They were from every era. Closest to the drone, half buried in sediment, lay the unmistakable curved hull of a Spanish galleon, its rotted timbers steel arrayed in the geometric pattern of a 16th century carrack, a corroded bronze cannon still mounted near the bow. 20 meters to the east, an iron-hulled steamship from the late 1800s lay on its side. Beyond it, a wooden two-masted schooner sat almost perfectly upright. The cameras swept further. A small Caribbean trading sloop, a Portuguese caravel, unmistakable conning tower of what appeared to be a World War II American submarine, lying tilted on the slope, a modern fishing trawler, its hull still painted blue. And then, near the center of the field, Brant zoomed onto a specific hull, an enormous iron vessel, more than 500 feet long, lying with a massive break amidships. Shape was unmistakable. It was a U.S. Navy collier from the early 20th century. There was only one ship of that exact specification missing in this region, the USS Cyclops, the 42-foot supply ship that had vanished in March of 1918 with 306 men aboard. The original Bermuda Triangle disappearance, the vessel that had simply ceased to exist somewhere between Barbados and Baltimore on a calm spring crossing. It was lying on the floor of the Puerto Rico Trench, and it was not alone. As the drone moved across the wreck field, the cameras began to catch other shapes that did not match anything in any maritime registry on Earth. Hull configurations that corresponded to no known shipbuilding tradition. A vessel near the eastern edge of the field with construction that one anonymous analyst described as predating European naval architecture by an order of magnitude. A small, almost intact wooden craft buried in deep sediment, whose carbon-dated timbers leaked from a German test in November 2024, returned an age estimate of approximately 5,000 years before present. There are no records of any ocean-going civilization in the Atlantic 5,000 years ago. There is supposed to be no such ship, and yet it was lying there in the floodlights. But the wrecks were not the strangest thing the drone filmed. Beyond the edge of the graveyard, where the slope of the trench wall began to descend into darker water, the cameras caught something else. Stretching across the seafloor in a pattern the wrecks did not follow, partially buried under millennia of sediment, was a series of geometric formations, straight lines, right angles, rectangular shapes arranged in a regular grid. Vail, in the post-expedition briefing in Brussels, said the formations were inconsistent with any known geological process at that depth. The structures bore an uncomfortable resemblance to formations documented at other deep water anomalies around the world. The Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, discovered in 1986. The submerged stone platforms off Cuba's western coast, mapped at depths of 20,300 feet. The 70,000-ton rectangular formation on the floor of the Sea of Galilee. The megalithic complex of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which pushed the timeline of human civilization back 6,000 years, when it was excavated in the 1990s. None of these had been formally accepted as artificial by mainstream archaeology. All of them sat at depths or in locations that would have been above sea level or accessible to humans during the last glacial maximum 18,000 years ago. The drone moved closer to the structures. The floodlights illuminated the edge of what appeared to be a corridor running between two of the larger formations. The magnetometer pinned to its maximum reading and stayed there. Then, the caught the last thing they would ever record. Along the edge of the corridor, partially obscured by a slow sediment plume, something was moving. Large, dark, elongated with regular ridges or segments along its length. The footage shows it for less than 4 seconds. Brandt, when later pressed by a German journalist, would say only that the shape didn't match any cataloged deep-sea organism in the World Register of Marine Species, and that its proportions were too uniform to be biological. 11 seconds later, the Helios IV fiber optic tether severed instantly. The signal did not fade, it cut. The drone was never recovered. Here's where the story stops being interesting and starts being dangerous. Because if the Helios IV footage is authentic, then the entire history of the Bermuda Triangle has a new and disturbing explanation. The 312 wrecks, identified in the survey area, alone account for nearly every major missing vessel in the region's recorded history. But the wrecks themselves are not the deepest mystery. The mystery is what is sharing the seafloor with them. Geometric formations stretching beyond the edge of the graveyard cannot be easily explained as natural geological features. The grid is too regular. The corridors are too symmetrical. If the parallels to Yonaguni, Cuba's submerged platform, the Sea of Galilee structure, and Göbekli Tepe hold, then we are looking at something that may have been built by human or pre-human hands during a period when the global ocean was nearly 400 feet lower than it is today. A submerged complex predating every known civilization on Earth. And then there is the question of what is generating the electromagnetic field. The magnetometer readings the Helios IV recorded are not consistent with naturally occurring magnetic anomalies. Oscillate. They pulse. They behave like the output of an active source. Something down there is still generating that field. After thousands of years on the bottom of the deepest trench in the Atlantic, then the compass failures pilots and sailors have reported for 80 years are not the symptom of folklore. They are the symptom of a machine, and the moving shape, the 4 seconds of footage Brandt has refused to describe, is the part of this story that no one wants to publish first. Because if its proportions are, in her own words, too uniform to be biological, then there are only two remaining possibilities. It is something built, or it is something that has adapted to live among what was built, in a place no human had ever looked. Until July 14th, 2024, you're going to hear the same response from mainstream science that you've heard about every other Bermuda Triangle claim. Honestly, their case is not without weight. To this day, the Helios IV recordings have not been independently verified by any peer-reviewed institution. Everything currently in circulation is second-hand, copied from internal expedition files, with no formal chain of custody. Dr. Vail himself has been careful with his public statements. In a brief release issued in December 2024, confirmed only that the expedition had documented extensive submerged wreckage of historical significance and unusual seafloor topography requiring further study. Skeptics argue the 312 vessel count is inflated, derived from sonar contacts rather than visual confirmation, and that many of those contacts could be rock formations or fragments of single larger wrecks counted multiple times. The identification of specific vessels like the Cyclops, critics argue, is even shakier. Hull dimensions alone are not enough to identify a wreck with certainty after a century of corrosion. The geometric formations, they say, are almost certainly natural. Sea basalt columns formed by rapid cooling of volcanic material frequently produce hexagonal and rectangular cross-sections that look uncannily artificial. The Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland is the most famous terrestrial example. The Puerto Rico Trench sits in an active subduction zone with significant volcanic history. The grid could be fractured basalt. The corridors could be erosion channels. The magnetic anomalies have an even simpler explanation. The walls of the trench contain large quantities of serpentinite, a mineral with naturally high magnetic susceptibility. The moving shape, critics insist, is almost certainly a giant deep-sea cephalopod, a class of organism in which marine biologists discover new species almost every year. Uniform proportions Brandt described could simply be a trick of low-light photography and sediment plume. 5,000-year-old wooden craft? Wood does not survive 5,000 years in seawater, even in oxygen-depleted environments. Either the carbon dating is wrong, the sample was contaminated, or the leaked lab report is fake. The Helios found something extraordinary. It is the first solid evidence in 80 years of looking, and one expedition with no recoverable hardware and no peer-reviewed publication isn't proof of anything. Here's the strange part. Most discoveries of this magnitude either get released to the world immediately or get debunked within months. The Vale expedition has done neither. The Belgian foundation that funded the dive has declined every major media interview request since the leak began. Vale himself has retreated almost entirely from public engagement. Brandt has stopped answering emails from outside her immediate research circle. The leaked footage continues to circulate through small private channels and never quite reaches the mainstream press. Yet, more than a year after the dive, the story refuses to die. Why? One possibility is that humans simply love a mystery and will keep one alive long after the evidence runs out. It's probably part of it. But another possibility is harder to dismiss. Because history has a habit of humbling us, Titanic was lost for 73 years before Ballard found her. The Endurance, Shackleton's ship, was finally located in 2022 after a century beneath the Antarctic ice. The submerged Doggerland landscape beneath the North Sea, an entire prehistoric continent where Mesolithic humans hunted and lived, was dismissed as folklore until sonar surveys revealed villages and rivers preserved beneath the seafloor. The void inside the Great Pyramid that muon tomography revealed in 2017 wasn't supposed to exist. The megaliths of Göbekli Tepe pushed civilization's timeline back 6,000 years overnight. Every generation has its consensus, and every generation discovers eventually that the consensus was missing something. Maybe the 312 wrecks are exactly what they appear to be. 500 years of unlucky sailors finally given a resting place we can see. Maybe the geometric formations are fractured basalt. Maybe the moving shape is a confused cephalopod, and the 5,000-year-old numbers of freight are a lab error. Or maybe we are looking at the largest archaeological and biological discovery in human history, sitting in the dark on the floor of the Atlantic, waiting for the second expedition. Because the Belgian Foundation has now announced, quietly, with very little press coverage, that a second mission is scheduled for the spring of 2026, time with 2 drones. This time with a manned submersible standing by on the surface, with cameras specifically designed to capture whatever it was that moved in front of the Helios IV in those final 4 seconds. The Brownson Deep is still there, still 28,232 feet below the surface, still pulsing, still hiding what it has been hiding for thousands of years. And the scientists keep going back,